Hey guys, I got a fun little project I wanted to do today, and I also wanted to do, or I've been wanting to do a 3D printing video for a while. I haven't done one in a little bit, and what I wanted to do here is create a little organizer for my SD cards. What I found is while I've been doing these videos is that my SD cards just get thrown everywhere, and I'm having a hard time um, remembering which card is full, which card I'm using, which card I've emptied. There's just piles of them everywhere. So I want to create an organizer that'll help me alleviate that issue, and also make a video about it as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The organizer itself is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be kind of a slab of plastic with 3 bins that are labeled that hold, the SD cards. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm in Tinkercad, and the first thing you should do when you're in Tinkercad is go ahead and name your project. What Tinkercad does is it just gives you some weird nonsense name. If you ever want to go back to your object, it's good to have it labeled and it's easier to find. Let's just call this SD card organizer. Okay, now the first thing I want to tackle with the object is the little hollow areas that's going to create the bins for the cards. And to do that, I need to bring in a hollow box, and I want to give it the size I want. Now, I've already measured this, and I want the bins to be about 60 millimeters by 60 millimeters. That should be big enough to hold several cards if they're kind of haphazardly tossed in there. So let's go ahead and bring in a ruler, and our box always starts out as 20 by 20 by 20. So let's go and fix that. Okay, so here is our hollow. Now, I would like to, this box is awfully sharp, right? The edges are 90 degrees. I would like to have a fillet on these edges, but here we come into one of the sort of weaknesses of Tinkercad. It just doesn't do fillets very well. You can sort of round over a full object like this, but say I wanted to create a fillet just on this edge right here, I can't do that. I can only round the entire object over. So whenever you want to do fillets on an object, you really need to kind of know ahead of time where you're going to want those to go and plan ahead for it. So let's go ahead and round over this object so that whenever I carve out the main piece, it has those rounded edges. Let's go ahead and make that a solid so I can visualize it a little better. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, let's go ahead and make it hollow again. So I'm going to need 3 of these little hollow objects to create the bins. And to do that, I'm just going to copy and basically copy and paste 2 more of these. And to do that, you just click on your object to select it, and then hit Control-Alt-D, and that will duplicate it. So there's one. And there's the other. Okay, so I've got my objects now. The next step is to orient these so they're the correct distance apart, and I want them to be 5 millimeters from each other. To do this, what I need to do is move my 0 point from the ruler. I want all the objects to be on a positive number. I take my center piece, and I want to measure from the center, not from this edge. So this little icon here, if you click on that, it will change to the point of the object you're measuring to. So now I'm measuring to the midpoint. So if this object is 60 millimeters wide, from the midpoint to the far edge is going to be 30 millimeters. Then I add 5 more millimeters, and that means the center of this object is going to be 35 millimeters from this object. I'm at 105, so this object is going to be 140 to this edge. And I go back to using the endpoint, and you see I'm 153. And there we go. So in a similar way, I need to do this guy right here. But I think the easiest way to measure that is to go ahead and group these two. Group here. Now I need to measure to the center point of this piece. So I click on use midpoint, and it is at 36. Let's make it a little bit easier number to work with. We'll make it 40. Okay, so if to the midpoint of this 60 millimeter object is 40, 30 to this edge, and then I need 5 more. So 35 plus 40 is 75. So this edge of this this full object needs to be at 75. So I click to use endpoint. We're already there. Okay, so now I have my hollow areas created. It's time to work on sort of the base, the main body of the organizer. So let's go ahead. I don't know why that black box comes up, but it drives me crazy when it does. But let's get those guys out of the way. So I just selected them and drug them out of my kind of work area. So let's pull in a box here. And I need this to be 5 millimeters wider. Well, actually 10 millimeters wider, and I need 5 millimeters of space on each side. So if this whole object, let's make it a one object, it is 150, is that right? 190. So if that's 190, and I need this to be, I have 5 millimeters on each side, it needs to be 200. So let's do that. And now I need to make the depth, and I want to leave enough room, so I don't want there to be just 5 millimeters on the top and bottom, you know, on this leading edge and this leading edge. I want there to be 5 millimeters of room here, but on this edge I want to have enough room for the text because I'm going to label each bin. Okay, let's go ahead and put this at 0. Now another thing I want to do is I want to add fillets to this object as well. But this is going to raise an issue with Tinkercad because, like I said, it's going to round over the entire object. And I want the bottom to not have fillets. It's going to help with printing, and it's going to help it sit on my desk better. So let me show you how I can give this object fillets while still having a flat bottom. It's sort of a workaround. So first we have the object selected, and I need to give it some radius. I think 2 will work. That looks pretty good. So now the object has, you know, radiused edges, but like I said, the bottom is also radiused, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in another hollow cube, and let's lower this. Make it bigger. Okay, so now I'm making sure that I'm cutting off that radiused bottom. So now I have that oriented correctly. I'm going to group them together and then hit the group button. So now we have a nice flat base for this to sit on my desk. Now I still want this to be 20, So let's go ahead and change the height. Oops. Okay. And let's put it on the plane. There we go. Okay, so now that I have my organizer base piece created, let's go ahead and drag these over here. Let's give it a 2 millimeters up, and I'm going to actually make this a little taller, so I make sure that it cuts all the way through that. And you can just grab these little handles and change the dimensions. Really easy way in Tinkercad to manipulate your objects. So I have this my main piece set at 0. I want this to be 5 millimeters from 0. We're now 167. We already were centered, I believe. Now let's just double check and make sure we are aligned. Yeah, we're aligned in this direction here. Let's get out of that. That looks pretty good to me. It might be a little tall. Let me do this and see what it looks like. That's probably a little better. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring in some text. And one of the kind of finicky things with Tinkercad is you can't choose your font size. You can choose your height from like this top to this bottom, but I can't choose the height from this top to this bottom. So the only way you can do that is with these little handles here, which is fine unless you want to make multiple text pieces, I guess you would say, multiple text objects that are consistent in height, they're consistent in size. But the problem with that is that it makes it difficult to make multiple text objects that have a consistent size. Like if I bring in another one, you know, I have to just kind of eyeball it to get it right. But there's a way we can work around that. First, I want to get my text size kind of fit to this object. So the first thing I need to do is get the text in place. Let's bring in a work plane and set it on top of our primary piece here. So now we're working on a plane that is right on top of this object. What I need to do is select my text, and you can see it's -20. I want this to be 0, so it's right on top of that. Okay, now I can move this text to here, and it sits right on top of my object, more or less. It's not perfect just yet, but we'll get to that. All I'm doing right now is just eyeballing my text size so it looks good. So we pull out another work plane and just throw it anywhere, and that will get you back to your initial work plane. Okay, so let's go ahead and shift left click will pan. So now I need to size this. And let's get a proper. I think this one's going to be empty. I also want to go ahead and change the color so I can see this better. Orange is fine. Okay. That looks pretty good to me, at least the size. So now what I need to do is I need to create 2 more text objects that have exactly the same font size. Now how you do that is first let's deselect, because we were in the text typing mode. So now let's select our text, and we just hit Control-Alt-Delete, Control-Alt-D. We'll copy that piece, and now we have another text object that is exactly the same size. And we need to do that one more time. Control-Alt-D, and there we go. Now we have 3 text objects that are exactly the same size. But I need to change the labels of the bins. that's going to be full. And this one is going to be entitled In Use. Okay, now that I have the text sized and in roughly the correct location, I need to orient the text with the bins. The way I want to do that is I'm going to go ahead and move the primary piece out of the way, and I'm going to orient these individually with the hollow pieces. Okay, so the next step is to orient the text with the bins, and the way I want to do that is I want to orient them individually. And the first step to doing that is I have these hollow areas, which are not hollow anymore, but they can easily be made hollow. I need to ungroup those so they're no longer one solid piece. So now I have 3 individual pieces. So I just select both the text that goes above it and the hollow area. And I don't want them to be hollow, because if I group them when they're hollow, they'll just disappear. So it's good that they change back to a solid. Now I have them selected. I need to align, and I just want to align in this plane, or right here. Okay, so now the full and that what will be hollow piece are centered. Okay, so let's do that with this one. Align, center it, deselect, and one more time. There we go. So now all these pieces are nicely aligned. Let's go ahead and select these, and I'm going to go ahead and group these for the time being. That's way so I can manipulate them easily. Let's move this in. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to 0. Now I want this this edge to be 5 millimeters north of this edge. So I've got the main object at the 0. This edge is on 0, so I just want this to be at 5. There we go. So now our object is almost complete. We've got everything aligned properly. We have sort of our pseudo fillets done. We have our text centered and aligned, but there's still one issue that I'm seeing here, and that is that the text is really proud. It's too tall. There's 2 ways we could make this text less proud. The one is you could just, well, first we need to ungroup this, and we can go ahead and make these hollows again. There we go. So now we select our text, and I want to go ahead and select them all as one object. So you could just make it shorter, right? They're 10 millimeters tall. You could make it like 2 millimeters. The problem with sizing the text in this fashion is that sometimes with Tinkercad, whenever you place one object on top of another object and it's directly on top, there's like a really small gap between the 2 objects, even though they're supposed to be connected. And when you print it, the objects just kind of fall apart from each other. So a better way to do this, let's go ahead and make that 10 again, is to just lower it into the one object. So we're 20. We need to lower that 8, so we'll just make it 12. There. And that text looks good to me. And now the last thing to do is select the entire object and to group it. There we go. We now have created our object. It looks pretty good to me. We are 22 millimeters tall. It should be okay. It might be a little tall, but we'll print it out and we'll see. I could make it smaller. Maybe that's better. So I don't want the object to be so tall it's hard to dig the cards out of. It looks like 3 cards stacked on top of each other aren't even 5 millimeters, and this would give me 13 millimeters of height inside the bins. So I think that's going to work. The next step is to print this, and to do that I need to send it to the slicer and get it sliced. So let's go ahead and export this as an STL, and you can see I've already done this once, but so save. And now our next step is to move this STL into our slicer to create the G-code for our printer. And okay, I just want to cut in here and just mention that I was going over my model before I started slicing it and printing it, and I noticed that my text wasn't on the same line. These two words, or I guess it's 3 words, but these 2 text objects were like 2 millimeters higher than this text object, and so I fixed that. I just selected both of them and pushed the down arrow twice. You know, this is just one of those things that whenever you create an object, it's good to double check your work after you think you're finished. But it was an easy fix. I just needed to take these 2 text objects and lower them 2 millimeters closer to the 0 of my ruler. Okay, that's that. I'm going to send this to the slicer. Now in my slicer, which is Simplify 3D, I'm going to go ahead and import my object, and it is in SD card organizer, and I want SD card organizer 1. You can see it barely fits on my tray. The printer I'm going to be using is my PowerSpec Pro that I got from Micro Center. I think it's as long as my objects fit on this printer, it's really been my go-to printer. I have a CR10, but I like that printer a lot, but it prints really slowly. At least the profile I have for it prints slowly, and I haven't had much luck with other profiles. So I've been sticking with my PowerSpec for objects that fit within it. But it's nice to have the CR10 for larger objects. So I have my profile set up. I'm using PLA setting. I'm going to be printing with PLA. Let's go ahead and do it on medium. With layers. 0.2. I'm going to go ahead and add a brim, and in Simplify 3D you just use the skirt brim settings, but you set your offset to 0, and then that'll give you a brim. If you set your offset to like 1, you would have a skirt. Infill, that seems a little high. Let's just do 15. 15 sounds good. What about my layers? Let's that's way too many top layers. The last thing I printed needed a lot of layers, and let's just do 3. 3 and 3 should be fine. Don't need any support material. This should be pretty standard. We're going to be on the right extruder, and what about the heat bed? 50, that's fine. Okay, this all looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and prepare to print. So Simplify 3D slices the model, and here we go. This just shows the layers, and I can take those down and see how it's going to print. That looks pretty good to me. And let's just save it to disk. SD card organizer 1. I don't need the 1. And let's go ahead and make a folder for this. and save it. This is going to take 4 hours to print. It's going to be a long print, primarily because I'm going with medium settings. But we're going to go ahead and transfer that to a SD card and get it started.